You're listening to Barely Legal in Web3. I'm your host, Jamelia Greer. This podcast is an unapologetic look at what's happening in tech from a lawyer's perspective. In addition to Tech Talk, each Monday I'll be sharing insights from my journey from lawyer in small town Connecticut to an entrepreneur in Dubai. Sound like fun? Go ahead and subscribe to make sure you never miss an episode. Now let's get into it. Welcome back for another episode of Barely Legal in Web3. Today, I'm joined by Ken Zhang, who is head of security at Google Cloud, Greater China. Ken, welcome to the show.
Hey, thank you, Jamelia, and pleasure to be here to talk about security and Web3, two of my favorite topics.
Yeah, and one of mine as well, Ken. And, your role at Google, obviously, that's something separate than we're talking about today. We're talking about security in general. But I'd love to just talk a little bit to kick it off, why security is so important for Web3 and just generally.
I think it's a topic we can spend the entire afternoon or evening, morning, and more to talk about it. But I think I wanted to talk, sort of zooming onto the Web3 kind of lens. I think one of the elements is about trust. Security builds the trust, and trust will help the especially Web3 industry to grow and getting more people to buy into it. And I think Web3, again, is quite a wide term. Underneath, you have different things like centralized exchanges, different chains, layer one, layer two, and roll-ups. You have decentralized applications and applications with different utilities like financial services. And even people talked about, different proof mechanisms using physical infrastructure. So the list goes on. So it's quite a wide topic. But in short, I think security builds trust. With the trust, people can then better embrace this technology.
Right. And trust is such an important topic today. I mean, there's so much that we read in the headlines when there is a falling out or a lack of trust. Can you tell us a little bit about some of the risks? I mean, that is certainly one risk, is that consumers don't trust you anymore. That's a big risk. But what are the other risks when there's a lack of security?
I think let's take some examples for, so in Web3, I think most of the consumers will be familiar with the centralized exchange where you can transact different coins and tokens, and some of the exchanges give the utility to bridge the Web3 world with the fiat money world like USDs, HKD, whatever. And also, we're all familiar with a lot of centralized exchanges going bankrupt and, hey, where's my money? What about all my assets? I think the risks could be, from a centralized exchange perspective, is the ability to give all the consumers, people who participate in the exchange ecosystem, the ability to hold on to their assets. So that's the reason why the multi-party compute, MPC wallet, is taking off quite a lot. So I think a lot of the big centralized exchanges actually only do MPC wallets. So with MPC wallet, essentially the consumers will have the ability to hold on to the assets, even the exchange, centralized exchange, become insolvent. They still have the assets. I think that's one part. The other risk could also be going to a little bit more technical side. For example, people are developing the smart contract on the chain. I'm just taking Ethereum, for example. Any smart contract that's been pushed to the chain is permanent. And if you're looking at the coding of the smart contract Solidity, and people who've done programming before will find lots of vulnerabilities in Solidity are actually the similar type of vulnerabilities we've seen in traditional programming, like the traditional buffer overflow actually exists as integer overflow on Solidity. Actually, there was some very prominent attacks on the back of the integer overflow. So the coding security, again, is not a risk. And obviously, the traditional private key management, where private key essentially in Web3 world is the crown jewel. You can have like 10 Bitcoins, 100, whatever. It could be just on the back of one private key, right? Or several private key depending on different chains. So I think these are the three risks I can think of right now from different layers: consumer layer and developers and the people running the ecosystem.
You mentioned smart contracts, and for a lot of people, when they think of a smart contract, they feel that it's something that once it is, on the protocol, that's it. It's done, and not just in terms of permanency, as you mentioned, but that it cannot be hacked, and that it is basically a fort. Can you talk a little bit about, firstly, what is a smart contract? And just tell us a little bit about that permanency that you mentioned, and then maybe, the risks of smart contracts.
Yep, cool. So I think for the analogy, smart contract essentially, as the name suggests, is a contract. What's the input? What's the output? There's logic in between. There could be business logic in building between. And the business logic is transparent. So when you push onto the chain, everyone will know this business logic. So by the principle, everyone can audit this transparency on the back of the whole, Web3 world. So input, output, there's logic in the middle, and it will operate without biases, without external factors. That's all great. Now, the problem is people will make mistakes. Computer systems will make mistakes, and people are coding. Even with a very experienced coder, very experienced cybersecurity professionals, they may still overlook some of the problems at the coding. So there might be business logics they haven't thought through all the scenarios. And there might also be some coding errors they haven't thought through before they push the contract onto the chain, which will become permanent. So, like you said, it's permanent. Once it's on, it's on. And there are people with ill intent who are trying to find ways to exploit either the coding or business logic flaws. So it's not bulletproof. The concept itself is great, but it's not bulletproof. Now, another analogy could be, I think I like this analogy because I like cars. So 10, 15 years ago, when you buy a car, the car goes off the production line. It has a little head unit where you do your, infotainment system and play audio, videos, etc. There is computer behind it, and that there is program, there's software on that head unit. But 15 years ago, when the car rolls off the production line, the car could be gone for good. If you ever find any vulnerability in the software behind your head unit, it's almost impossible to patch them, and it's gone for good. So it's almost similar to the smart contract. It's out, it's out. So obviously there are other ways, people are thinking about other ways to hey, can I update, can I upgrade a contract, or think about different processes to replace a vulnerable or older version of smart contract. I think having a good coding practice is the first part. And the second part, think about the crisis management process. If you ever find out someone's trying to exploit your smart contract, or you find out vulnerabilities, or good citizens find out, hey, by the way, Ken, your smart contract is vulnerable and you need to patch it. Maybe later on we'll share about some new thoughts about building the smart contract and then even Gen AI together. These two, seems like a buzzwords, but it actually will make sense. I thought about some use cases.
Excellent. And, for many lawyers, when they think about smart contracts, they just hone in on the word contract. And what I'm hearing you say is that there are some logics and some rules that are within this code, which basically, once one condition is met, then automatically something else happens and an output comes. And so I guess to kind of break it into some example could be purchasing a house. Once I hand over $500,000, then the house becomes mine. And so in a smart contract, once that $500,000 is received by the other side, then the asset could potentially be released, or should be released to the person that has provided the money. And what you're saying is that is permanent, but there are also some ideas that are coming out now about upgrading smart contracts and potentially tweaking them that is a bit more sophisticated.
Yeah, it could be. But still, if you look talking about different chains, Ethereum, by design, the smart contracts are permanent. So the secure coding practice that we have been practicing in software engineering in last, I don't know how many years, will still stand. And the idea of building MVP and find a problem and fix them on the go will probably not apply in the smart contract development. People have to really, really think through thoroughly before they push the code onto the chain.
Do you think there are, things that people are doing now, or I should say Web3 companies are doing now, to adequately address these risks with respect to not just smart contracts, but security risks in general in Web3? Do you think that Web3 industry as a whole is sort of ahead of the race on this?
I think definitely people learn. In Web3, for the lack of better terms, in Australia, I always say when you drop the ball, and that's big time. And oftentimes when people make mistakes, on the back of it will be very large amount of monetary loss. So what happened? I've seen a trend over here is going back to secure coding practice. People are actually putting lots of effort, and people in the community building toolings, open source toolings to help people to write better code. Some of the tooling actually will be integrated with the people like developers' IDEs, integrated development environment. So at the time, developers punching the code, the little tooling will actually start scanning to say, hey, by the way, Ken, this particular the variable you're setting over here doesn't have the boundary. You might be vulnerable to integer overflow. So given the earlier feedback to the developers, so over time, coaching developers to write better code. Okay, they don't need to be, hey, look, this is secure code, but this is better coding. Full stop. So it's like the proper engineering. I still believe proper engineering before the software engineering, it has very little margin for error. So imagine you're building a bridge. You cannot go, hey, like have 10% of margin for error, and people will die, right? So I think have a better proper engineering practice built into the software engineering for the Web3, and people are doing that already. And also, obviously, another trend, a lot of the big centralized exchanges, because they get to see lots of transactions around the Web3 world, what they have done is built the threat intelligence sort of on-chain analysis based on what they have seen. And I wanted to contribute that knowledge to the community as well. So obviously, there are good citizens, the bad citizens, people with ill intent, and people with real utility to promote Web3. And what they're doing over there is they've been tracking some suspicious, addresses, for example, and some of the transaction patterns, etc. So these are the good things that are happening in the Web3 industry I have seen recently.
So on one hand, you have the need to train developers so that they can just code better. So there's that human element there. And then on the other hand, you have AI or intelligence being used to sort of scan and make sure that there are no errors or identify those. I mean, I guess playing devil's advocate, do you think it's too much tech to have AI check for, risks and, gaps? And, you mentioned that there could be bad actors potentially that are involved in that. I mean, that seems to me kind of like a risk in itself.
Yeah, I think, well, like AI's been around for a long time, but AI only becomes a topic everyone talks about when Gen AI or utility of the Gen AI, the chatbot utility sort of brought by ChatGPT last year. But one thing, I'm talking about Gen AI right now. Gen AI, one thing it can really do really well to help security is its ability, and you heard about hallucination from all the Gen AI products, basically just go crazy, go mad. And that's not a bad thing for certain use cases. For example, when we are testing the code, we are testing different scenarios. For experienced cybersecurity professionals, they kind of go, hey, look, this is my experience. These are the 15, 20, or 100 test cases I want to test against the coding I've written, different scenarios. And that's great. But again, people will make mistakes. People will overlook stuff. But what if you use a Gen AI? Even with most crazy edge cases, Gen AI can sort of spit it out. And it'll actually give you better coverage of very edge cases that I or some professionals wouldn't think of. And that's a good utility. Being crazy in generating those edge cases and automate our testing process is actually a good thing. In fact, Google, we are using the Gen AI to do the fuzzing, which is like sort of testing for vulnerabilities for open source projects that we use already. And that's a great thing. So being crazy, hallucination, or from Gen AI might not be the bad thing, depending on what use case is.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, I guess it's kind of like the example of surgeons using robots, right? So, yes, you could have the old school surgeon go in and he's got a great steady hand to do a really intricate and delicate surgery. But if you have a robot and the margin of error is either half or, just a percentage of that human error, then it makes sense to use the technology in that way. And, kind of picking up on your point about Gen AI, I do think that there is this overarching sort of not necessarily fear, but people are concerned about, how to use it, because even though AI has been around for so long, Gen AI or general artificial intelligence hasn't really been exposed to so many use cases. We haven't seen it in so many different use cases. And so the question becomes is, yes, it can think out of the box and it can help us identify certain risks. But then, is there something else that we are not thinking about? As humans, maybe we only see a narrow sort of sliver of what the Gen AI can do, but there's some other risk that we're not really thinking about.
Yeah, absolutely. I think at the beginning I should have talked about this being working for Google, and this podcast purely my statement and my own opinion, not my employers. I have my own opinion about AI. So I think even before Gen AI, the predictive AI or any AI is working on the probabilities essentially. Obviously, Gen AI is working on the probabilities of the text or videos and all that multimodal, whatever it's trained on. So they will know KEN. My name spells as KEN as opposed to KNE because it's being trained on large corpus of text. It's all about probabilities right now. It's a very new subject. In fact, Gen AI, as is today, was on the back of one of the Google's research on the transformer. I think it was only out in 2017. Keeping me honest, I think that's around that. So it's pretty new school of like science for Gen AI. It's probabilities only. So we need to be realistic about what Gen AI is good at and what it cannot do, as opposed to bringing a Gen AI to look for a problem to solve. We should turn around, hey, if there's a problem, can I solve it with programming today, right? If it cannot, can I solve in other things? And is Gen AI the right thing? Give you one example. So Gen AI is pretty good at summarizing large corpus of text. It's what it does. And it's because it's based on how it's being trained and the probability distribution of different words. But does it have the ability to help you to make the judgment? For example, can you use Gen AI to detect or make judgment of credit card fraud? Maybe not, because it doesn't possess that capability just yet. So maybe the combination of Gen AI helping you to summarize what the case is and your traditional predictive AI that's trained purposely for anomaly detection will actually plug in. So it's not a silver bullet, and misconception of Gen AI solves all the problem is actually not right, at least right now, as the science stands.
And for those people who are in security today, how important is it to understand how to use AI in a role that is security based today? Could someone potentially start in cybersecurity or security generally for IT and have no understanding of AI and still be successful?
Short answer is I don't want to depends. It sounds like consultants, but it probably is depends. So what happens over here is, I guess, it's a tooling, and the mentality matters, and the principles matters, and it does bring challenges because some of the threats we have never seen before or not prominent before will become prominent. For example, in Gen AI world, the poisoning of the training data, even a smaller amount of poisoning of training data, could drastically change how the model will work. And again, the Gen AI models are trained on hundreds of different layers of neural networks, and we barely explain what's happening in those networks. And one of the networks can be tampered and can be used just to break down the entire system. So it's challenging. I think we need to, again, starting from the security principles, secure coding and authentication, the rest of everything will stand, but it probably manifests differently in different parts of the ecosystems. And using AI to aid some of the tasks that might be time consuming, but will have to be done. For example, I'm taking one person who's working in the security operations center. He's a junior person, and he needs to summarize large amount of the alerts every day to make sense of them and write a report and figure out next steps. And then maybe the summarization part over time can be tested and aided by Gen AI, because that will make that person's job more sufficient. Maybe over time, that can be some of the normal cases and general next steps recommendations can also be done by supported by operators. It will be step by step, but it will not replace human completely. It's a tooling. I guess it will replace people who don't know how to leverage AI as a tool, but AI, I think, right now will not replace people in a job right now.
Right. And I tend to agree with that. I think this is part of the fear about AI is that people are afraid that it will take over their jobs. And I think I read an article not too while back, will smart contracts replace lawyers? Of course not, because it doesn't have, it's an algorithm, it's a code, it's not, there's no judgment in there, right? The gray area we still have to figure out, we have to discuss it. How does it apply to different rules and so on and so forth? So that is still something that I think people really can take back and kind of rest assured that AI is not really replacing them at this point in time in most industries. Although in the graphic design space and video editing, I've seen AI do some really cool stuff. So that I think remains to be seen. One thing I wanted to mention, Ken, I look at security kind of as a cousin of privacy. And privacy these days is becoming increasingly important, particularly in Web3, because there is this understanding that everything is transparent. But yet in some circles, people feel like, oh, well, it's also private. I'm anonymous, right? So how can we both be transparent on the blockchain with all transactions able to be seen on like an ether scan, but yet anonymous at the same time?
I guess let's talk about transaction being transparent, i.e., one wallet address a string of characters sending to another string of characters and 0.5 Bitcoin, whatever. And the transaction is transparent, so it's traceable, so you can see what's going on. So that gives that's a founding cornerstones of the blockchain. Now, the anonymity part of the blockchain transaction is people behind those string of characters that they don't want to be known as Ken or Julia. If that's indeed a valid use case, there are technologies right now can facilitate that. So I don't know how many exchanges or even decentralized exchanges implement this model, but you can actually generate a one-off addresses based on cryptographically based on the keypads you have, okay, and still be able to spend it. So again, it adds another layer of facade into your real identity. But again, I previously talked about a lot of centralized exchanges running this on-chain analysis already. So even with a set 200 different wallets, over time, you will form a pattern and people will probably figure out who's who. And also, if you look at a Bitcoin, we'll take a Bitcoin, for example, the largest holdings Bitcoins, the top 10, you already know who they are. And some of the companies are there, like Tesla holds quite a bit. So anonymity there, at least for Bitcoin, for the large transactions, will become again, I think it can be difficult, but depending on utilities, if people really want to have the utilities anonymity, there are technologies to support that. But in some jurisdictions, anonymity may not be a good thing. When you're trying to bring regulation into centralized exchange and touching fiat money, and your entire know your customer AML, counter-terrorist terrorist funding, all that will kick in, and that's gone, and by design as well. So yeah, technology you can support that model.
So it can support that. So essentially, if I'm using a certain exchange that has this capability, they could create like a burner wallet for me as I do the transaction so that no one will know it's Jamilia's wallet. It just shows this burner wallet if they have that technology.
In fact, right now, a lot of centralized exchange don't assign each, or maybe disclosing the technology. I think lots of them don't assign one-to-one to individuals. But still, centralized exchanges usually will go to KYC, so they already know who you are. Especially if you want to bring the crypto world to fiat money. But again, I think the technology supports outside of financial or fintech, might be anonymity parts will play crucial in the use cases I haven't thought about right now. But technology it can support that model.
Since we're talking about technology and we've kind of moved into the topic of privacy, I'd like to get your personal thoughts on TikTok and what's happening there. And so just kind of to set the scene, the United States government has essentially given TikTok a time frame in which ByteDance has to sell TikTok to a U.S. company in order for it to continue operating in the U.S. And there's a lot of back and forth about privacy concerns and what that means for Americans and then others as well. We're thinking about technology and how it's used. Do you see sort of a trend where data on apps is going to start becoming more scrutinized?
I think so. The privacy becomes something almost everyone will think of and care about, especially for the younger generation, or even right now, because it's such a word. I think 15, 20 years ago, when you say privacy, and people go, okay, now privacy, people care. Oh, what about is my phone listening to me, and where's my data set? Is in United States and Singapore, Hong Kong. But I think leaving the politics and the rest of the side, I think one thing, technology can also support the free flow information and collaboration, yet giving the privacy back to people. So previously, at the beginning of this podcast, I talked about MPC, the multi-party compute, and that's a technology not new. Okay, I think it's largely used in the pharmaceutical industry, where you and I we cannot share the patient data, but you and I probably have to work together, develop a new drug to make it more efficient and reduce the time development, etc. So that's where MPC were kicking. So essentially, it's a black box in the middle. It can retrieve information from party A and party B, and does its analytics and whatever it is, and then send output or insights back to party A and B. But at the same time, party A and B cannot have access to each other's data. So being party A and B, I'm still holding on to my privacy. My private information is still mine. But still, I wanted to work with another party to have the collaboration, to have the output, the shared insights. That can be done. And MPC is actually moving outside of pharmaceutical, into the Web3, obviously, with a lot of wallets, and also even to the AI as well. So in AI, Gen AI, there's a term called IAG, retrieval augmented generation, essentially to just eliminate the risk of the hallucination. People will have to give some grounding, so the large language model LLMs don't go crazy. And with that, the grounding information can be sensitive. You don't want LLM provider to have information, but how do you do that? MPC will help you, right? That's the multi-party compute, keeping the information secure, but also collaborates at the same time. And in ads space as well, online ads, you heard about Google is getting rid of the cookies, right? The Chrome browser basically, hey, no third-party cookies. But we actually do ads for a living. So it does a lot of the social media companies. So we're actually building MPC sort of concept called a privacy sandbox as well. We want to bring all the ads developers on board to leverage MPC concept to keep the privacy to all the people, but also having the output insight to provide personalized, correct ads to people. So again, the technology can support that. It will take it would take probably a generation or few large companies and large amount of developers to get onto the new way of doing things.
I think that's such an important point, is that the technology can support what it is that we want. And privacy and security enablement from businesses is a choice. If the business is actually making a choice, like, do I want to protect or to block certain data points in this transaction? Do I want to create an MPC where user A cannot see who user B is, or certain data doesn't go through? And it's essentially a choice. I think what's interesting, and I think you've sort of hinted towards this, is that it's going to take some time. Number one, I think for tech culture to get to a point where people are like, no, if it doesn't have, this particular privacy or security widget on it, then I'm not going to use it, right? So if it doesn't have this black box, I don't want to use it. And also for the companies to realize that this is a cost, we have to take it. We've got to pay this cost in order to get the users, because the culture is moving towards wanting to use products where there's just more privacy baked in.
Yep, absolutely. I agree. At least providing the option to the users. So you can indeed turn it off. You can go, look, I want to share my data. Then maybe there's another concept of how do you monetize your personal data. But at least having the option, people are conscious making decision of, I'm sharing my data. Okay. And that will build, again, going to the very first question, will actually build trust. And the trust is very important to push any technology to the next wave of mass adoption.
I'd like to shift focus and talk a bit about future trends and what we can expect, particularly in the world of security. And we've talked a bit about privacy and security, but are we moving towards a world where data is more secure? And if so, how are we going to get there?
I think the data is going to be more secure. That will be facilitated by the people's conscious people, not just security professionals, but also people providing data and people holding data, the data providers and data processors, data custodians, etc., all working together. Again, all in all, technology exists to facilitate all those outcomes. It's the habits, I guess. Like I talked about the developer example, a developer as an engineer or junior developer, I want to get things done. There's shortest path, insecure path. I can get it done, it will work. There's slightly harder path, maybe more future-proof and a secure path. It takes time to go over that. But humans are inherently most of us opting for the easy path. So maybe what we should do is build the boundary, the guardrails to guide people to go through the harder path. And over time, that becomes a default path, right? And that way, we can then facilitate the future of, hey, more secure data, for example, because everyone will be actually going to the default path of doing things, removing that easy, insecure path for most of the people in the ecosystem. That will be the future. Again, that's what we call a shift left in security. People talk about. Just my 2 cents on that shift left.
Yeah, it's so important for us to remember that we are the creators of technology, not the other way around. Like we have choice to create certain technologies in a certain way with a certain intent and spirit in mind, and not that, because we can do something, we're going to do it just because we can. And I think it goes back to that mindset. You're calling it, shift left. It's the mindset of, let's move towards this. This is our utopia. This is what we want it to look like. Not, hey, it's a free for all. And by the way, I already know what you ate for breakfast this morning, Ken, because I saw it from some data points on an app.
Yep, absolutely. Making the secure path, a good path, easier for people as well, like the good on nudging theory, making the insecure path harder, making the secure path or the path you want people to embark on easier. So over time, people will just opt for that. That's just a human instinct.
If you were to leave our listeners with one thing to take away from this discussion? And I know it's going to be tough because we've talked about so many really cool
Yeah.
parts, from a mindset of security and the culture moving security towards a certain way. But particularly for lawyers and for people who are operating in this space and have to support the businesses, what would be one thing that you want them to take away from this conversation?
I think it's the principles, the good security, what does it look like, will stand over time. It stood in Web2, it will stand in Web3 and generate the rest of it. So, for example, the good security hygiene, the security principles, and having the authentication, the rest of it, those are the principles. It will manifest differently in different technology stacks. I think for the people probably in the legal systems, understanding those principles and unpack problems using systematic framework of these principles to understand new technology will actually help them. Because at the end of the day, all of those things will stand. For the lawyers, for example, if you have a great framework to understand a problem, to unpack technology, just from a security perspective, you will stand the test of time. So having a framework, the good security principles will be your Bible. To tackle all technological problems.
Smart words. It's basically just hold on and wait for it to manifest because it's coming. And I think that's a really important point for a lot of people as they see that there are a lot of security breaches in the technology right now for Web3. We need to understand that those basic tenets of cybersecurity and cloud security are still in place, and we just need to be patient.
Yep. Yeah. Hold on. Like, remember those old principles. They still apply. They are there. So good security hygiene will stand the test of time and always be relevant for all the technologies.
Ken Zhang, Head of Cloud Security, Greater China, Google. Ken, thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you for the time. It was a great chat with you.
Before I close out, Ken, I almost forgot. If people have additional questions or looking to find you online, where can they find you?
LinkedIn, I guess. I'm open for LinkedIn chat. I'm very open for chat of new ideas, new technology, or security questions, etc. I'm happy for a great chat over LinkedIn.
Excellent. Thanks for joining us today, Ken.
Thank you.
Hey guys, thank you so much for tuning in and listening to today's episode. I appreciate when you guys tune in and the time that you take to listen to the show and support us. And I have one thing that I'd love for you to do that would really help us out, which is rate the show. If you've enjoyed it, make sure you rate it. You can do it on whatever platform you're listening on. That would do wonders for us. And if you really want to be a super fan and really support the show, there's a link below that you can support us and donate a small monthly contribution, which allows us to continue to create great content for you. Thanks so much again. Appreciate you, and see you next time.